So today, as Rhonda mentioned, and Ed too, we're going to share stories of when God met us where we were. Think about it. Is there a time that God met you? Maybe you're sitting there wondering or listening and saying that you're not sure if God really meets us now, like he met the people in the Bible. Maybe you're doubting that. Or maybe you've heard someone share about God speaking to them and you've doubted if it could really be true or if he could speak to you in that way. So again, as Rhonda said, consider, how do you think of God? Do you see him as your guide, your healer, your comforter, your confidence, your mediator, your peace? And if you can remember when you started thinking that, maybe that is the story of when God met you. This morning when I was talking to Dale about this, he said, well, and sometimes we don't realize till later. So even if you have a story of when you look back and you realize, oh, God was there. I know there's been times I've had a change of how I was thinking. I was really frustrated. And I pray, God, help me in this because I know I'm not thinking right. And then later in the day, I'm like, oh, I got peace. That had to have come from him. So he didn't say anything to me, but he changed my heart. So as each person shares this morning, we want to remember that each of us is created intricately by him, different and unique. And so he may speak to Rhonda in one way, but me in another, or Lisa, or Bev, or anyone here in a different way. And just think about it and reflect and consider how the Lord may have met you in the past. We have a few people here that are willing, that have volunteered to share ahead of time. But also then we'll have some girls bringing the mic around if you want to raise your hand and share as we go along. So first, I believe Janet's going to come forward and share some things. And then what mic do the girls use? This one here? Oh, okay, that one.
I'll start out by saying, um, forgive me, I have written a short story. Ed, the scripture you talked about this morning was Luke 24. I had that written, that was what I was starting with. And my story got so long, I took it out. God brought it back with you this morning. He felt for some reason that should be there. I just sat back there and grinned. He shows up in so many ways. The stories I will share will not be new to many or maybe all of you, but hopefully there will be something I have not shared before that will be of interest. God has always met me right where I was physically, spiritually, or emotionally. I have never had to go somewhere to meet him. He has always come to me. How God meets me has not always been the same, but majority of times it has involved someone other than myself. With Twyla, God's meeting with both her and I at our pool had a purpose. The purpose was for God, through me, to be able to supply her needs as she journeyed home. It took some passing of time to recognize the purpose of our journey, who orchestrated our connection, and who maintained our deep friendship. God's purpose behind Twyla and my journey began as her and I sat on a Sunday afternoon dangling our feet in our pool. God was there, but we never saw him. The journey lasted for 13 years. Twyla and I both admitted neither one of us had chosen the other, but our friendship grew quickly and grew very deep, and the purpose became evident as we traveled along. I don't think I have ever shared this, and I never shared it with Twyla. But for me, the reason I would not have chosen Twyla for a friend at that time was our church had just gone through a rough time with Dennis and Joyce Coons, which ended up with the Coon family leaving. And I was badly hurt over that separation. And I blamed Twyla and Bob and a few others for that split. I needed time. I needed time to forgive. That's why I know it was God's doing, not mine, not my choice. I must say, God took care of the forgiveness issue very quickly. My forgiveness was pretty much instant after we dangled our feet in the water, even though we had no idea what God was doing. Just maybe the water cleansed my forgiveness issue so I could begin a new journey. The other difference was that friendship was perfect. I can and probably have screwed up every relationship. That alone told me Christ was meeting both Twyla and I at every turn, right where we were, to take care of Twyla's needs. I know God's love flowed through me for her because over those 13 years, my love for her was beyond my human ability. One day she said to me, "You don't know what it means to me to be able to see your house." I guess there was a comfort in not only our extremely close friendship, but also our actual closeness as far as distance. That physical closeness made it much easier to help her as her health declined. After Twyla's going home, the next Sunday that I sat in this church on the back pew, because I knew I probably would struggle to stay in the service because controlling my tears was very difficult. But during that service, I literally saw God's face on the brick wall behind me beside the cross. His face stayed for maybe 2 to 3 minutes. And then he was gone. And I have never seen him again in that way. I kept looking away and looking back. I remember thinking, am I seeing what I think I'm seeing? His face was crystal clear and just like I would have pictured it. The 13-year journey with all its ups and downs, laughter and tears was finished. Even though expected, the loss and sadness was extremely heavy. There was one time she told me that whatever I told her to do, she would listen because she knew I had her best interest at heart. For a while, I dealt with regret and guilt that I held her hand and whispered in her ear it was okay to go, and at that moment, she stepped into heaven. That regret didn't last long. I think God came to me as real as he could that morning to say, I'm here. Part of the journey with Twyla also included the purchase of Old Mill Wooden Crafts. The desire for such a business began some years prior to the actual purchase. I used to go to my sister, who lives in the Lancaster area, about twice a year, and we would visit the Amish-run stores. One time I remember saying to her, I would love to have a store like this. Knowing that was impossible for us financially, I can remember where I was and what the store looked like. I believe God planted that desire, then brought that desire to reality because it had a purpose. If God had not planted that desire years before, would I have obeyed in the purchasing of Old Mill? Some years before the purchase of Old Mill, I worked at a dentist's office. Twyla's cancer had moved to her liver, so I met with the owner and asked him if when Twyla's cancer gets worse, would he allow me to take a leave of absence to care for her? And his answer was no. From a business standpoint, that was not doable. I totally understood. But as I left his office, I promised God to care for Twyla when she needed me, and I would just quit my job and we would make do financially. It wasn't long till the journey with Old Mill began. Old Mill was totally in place when Twyla required physical care. The evening I held Twyla's hand and she stepped into heaven, I heard, "The purpose for the store is over." I called Claire to tell him Twyla had passed, and I said to him, God told me the purpose for the store is over. God is not always clear, and I have also noticed he speaks in a way that is different than how I speak. He told me the purpose was over, but I had to figure out from that what the purpose was. Looking back, I realized Old Mill gave me the freedom to be with Twyla when she needed me. It enabled me to fulfill my promise to God and Twyla and keep us going financially. It still took a couple of years until one morning I said to God, okay, I'm ready to sell. And that day, I had my buyer. God told me who to contact. I did have a few questions concerning his choice, but I picked up the phone, placed the call, and within an hour, I had a verbal offer to sell, and everything went according to God's plan, and we went to settlement. It was a commercial property outside of Frederick, Maryland, along Route 15 that included 3 separate businesses, so the price tag, limited buyers, and the market was not good in 2007. When we went to do our taxes that year, Larry Musselman said, in this market, how did you sell that property? I said, Larry, I didn't. God did. After Twyla passed, I struggled to come to church. I think God knew he had to do something to keep me coming because it would have been very easy for me to just stay home and deal with my loss alone. God knew what would work. It was another dreaded Sunday morning, and I was not able to control my emotions. So once again, I went to stand beyond the doors in the entrance. While standing in the entrance, tears rolling, through the sanctuary door comes John carrying Julie, who was crying. John, in John's straightforward, caring manner, said to me, I know why Julie is crying. Why are you? So I answered him, and then I said, can I take Julie? And he very willingly handed her over. That started a close relationship that kept me coming to church. Julie came hunting me, and I came hunting Julie. God knew that the only person that could take Twyla's place in my heart at that time could be a child, and that child just happened to be the one and only cute Julie. I miss her still today. Another time God came to me was May 2019 when I was rushed into surgery for a cardiologist to place stents in my heart. I had drove myself to the hospital for a routine stress test, and I failed miserably. I couldn't even finish it. Within seconds, there was 3 heart surgeons in the room. Everyone kept saying, "How are you feeling?" I said, "Fine, as soon as I can breathe." They were not going to wait for Claire to get there. I was signing papers and headed for surgery. Claire did arrive before I went into surgery, but they were not going to wait for him. They had spoke with him over the phone. The cardiologist came in inquiring how I felt. By that time, I could breathe again, and I said, "Fine." I said, "The question is, how do you feel? You're the one going to do my surgery." Everyone was flying around. I could tell time was of the essence. The only person waiting to go into surgery was me, which seemed strange. I said, "Were you just waiting for me?" And when I think back, I think it was possible that God had cleared their schedule just for me. What was going to happen that morning was no surprise to him. I had a peace that was not normal. I laid down on the operating table and said, "God, I'm in your hands." And I truly had no fear. The absence of fear was because of the presence of God. He met me right where I was. There was and continues to be the situation with Kim. The day the bus door opened and there stood Kim, who I had never met, crying and sharing a short version of what was going on in her and Tenley's life. I felt deep compassion and a strong pull to help her. I did think, "God, is this you?" The next conversation I had with her, which I believe was the next day, she kept apologizing for her tears and for everything she told me that morning. She said, "I do not share my problems and what is happening in my life." She said, "I don't know what came over me." To this day, she doesn't share with me unless I dig with questions. She is a very private person. I continue to feel God needed boots on the ground because things in her life moved quickly. She definitely needed God's help. I continue to believe it was God, and so I continue to do what I can. In this situation, it was and continues to be a feeling. There has been times God spoke to me concerning church issues. Also, when Gaymans came to share with us that they had decided to leave the Indian reservation and start a school, it was not a surprise to me. God had shared that with me before they came. God shared with me that Aaron was going to be fine before we had the church gathering to pray for him. I came to give support to Bethel, but knowing God had the situation under control. I have received direction through God's silence. When COVID was rampant, I asked God if I should drive school bus. He never answered me. So it was time for a decision, and I said to God, "I'm going to take your silence as an answer that it doesn't matter if I drive bus or not. You will take care of me." So I drove, and he did take care of me. For many years, I believe I have journeyed with God, or should I say he has journeyed with me. I have been blessed way beyond what I deserve, and he has always, always met me right where I was.
So now we'll open it up to, we'll pass the mic and see who wants to share out there. Janet had a lot of things in there, and I might have to listen again to see all the ways that she felt nudged by God. So we do have Pat who's willing to share something. So if you can raise your hand and they'll bring the mic to you.
Good morning. I have two stories, and I didn't write them down. Um, First one was we were living in Hanover, and we had 4-year-old Kevin and 2-year-old Rachel. And we were thinking maybe that was a good sized family. And then I thought I might be pregnant. So I went to the doctor, toddlers in tow, to have a pregnancy test. And they called, at that time you had to wait a few minutes. You had to sit there and you had to wait. And I'm sitting there with the 4-year-old and the 2-year-old, trying to keep them busy. And they called me up to the desk and they said, "It's positive. When do you want to schedule your first appointment?" And my jaw dropped. And like, no, it's not. But it was. I was kind of in a daze. I scheduled my first appointment and I looked behind me and there is my 2-year-old daughter getting ready to stick her finger in an electrical plug and my 4-year-old son climbing on the back of a chair trying to climb up these lines, which kind of summed up life at that point in time. And I thought, how on earth am I going to handle a third child? And this was quite a concern. Kurt was cool with a third child. I wasn't sure I could do it. So it was beautiful May day, and I was hanging laundry outside, and I was grumbling over this, crying. I don't know, not exactly crying, but whining. Maybe that's a good word. And I'm hanging laundry, looking out from the hill down onto Furman Mill Road, and I heard a voice say, "Be still and know I am God." And I thought, I can do that. Good call. And then it said, "My ways are not your ways, and my thoughts are not your thoughts." Okay, you have a plan for this boy, this child who's coming. Um, it was still an exciting adventure with 3 children, 5 and under. I was always counting because you only have 2 hands with 3 kids. There was always one who wasn't holding on once they got big enough to walk, but he is an amazing young man. And we're glad he's here. The other one is, so God can meet you hanging out laundry. The other one is when Kurt, the last couple of years Kurt worked for the county, he was in detectives, and it was not a very pleasant time. His commute was so long to Towson from the farm. And, he was an hour and a half, sometimes longer, one way. So 3 hours in the car, and he would get up at 3:30 in the morning, so he would go to the Y and run first, and then he'd get a shower at the Y, go to work. And if he got home by 6:30, we felt real good, and he was in bed by 7:30. So there really wasn't a lot of family time. And then there was overtime, and he would work side jobs to make sure the family stayed financially solvent. And that was all good, but we missed him terribly. And I worried terribly because I knew he was getting sometimes only 4 hours a night sleep. And driving so far, always in the dark, I was scared. And often I would stay awake until about 15 minutes before he would get home because I thought, okay, he's like in New Oxford now, he's close. And by then I could drift off, and if he came in and the boots came on the floor, that was good. But sometimes I'd wake up suddenly, and it had been an hour and he wasn't home yet. And then I'd panic, what happened? And this was before cell phone service, and it was long distance. So it was very stressful. So one night I was in bed alone, and I was sleeping, which was a good thing. And I woke up and I was looking toward the front windows, and there was some light coming in the front windows, not from morning, just ambient moonlight, I guess. And there was this really big man, really, maybe 6'6", 7 foot tall, standing in front of the window in the bedroom. Not outside the window, in the bedroom. And it was dark, so I only saw a shadow, and he was facing me. Now, any sane person would know that that would be a very good time to be terrified because he couldn't have been 6 feet away. And I couldn't have been more vulnerable. But I was at peace. And then he dematerialized. And weirdly enough, that's when I got scared. And I am convinced to this day that that was an angel that the Father had sent to look after me and look after the family while we slept. And when I was awake, I didn't need to see him, but I got to catch a glimpse of him because I was at peace while he was there, while I could see him, and I was afraid once he left. So the Father met me in bed one night.
In a vision. Yeah.
Whatever
Dream.
you can say
Yeah.
however you want.
Mhm.
I was awake.
As you're listening, is there anyone else that has something, and you can just have a sentence or two, or what, however, a few minutes, whatever you need.
Okay, you know I'm a hard had person, and I was working down the road, and I was in Frederick at the time with my mother, and I got the flu. I landed up in the cancer ward I had the SARS, and it went into my platelet system. So the doctor said, make sure you get your shots every year. So I said, okay. So the next thing I did, I was coming home from work one day and fell asleep at the car and rear-ended the back end of a tractor trailer. So when it was time to go back to work, I said to myself, God, you don't have to hit me in the head a second time. I'm going to quit that job. Don't go down the road anymore. So that's what I did. And I was very happy that I did it. Last Monday, my granddaughter graduated over in very nice area, Stevenson University, and then we had to go to her house, which was in Baltimore, and I was driving and I thought, I don't think this is where she lives. I was down on the south end of US 1. US 1 runs up the whole coast, if you know anything. And I was by Copland University, and I thought, I don't think this is the neighborhood. Then I looked around and said, this is the kind of neighborhood that I grew up in. What's wrong with you, Louise? So I drove up US 1, got to go where I was supposed to be, but I did lock my doors. So, but somehow the Lord looks over me. I think there's a saying, either drunks or fools. I don't know which category I go into. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. So it was Myers there. For the mic. So it was an event, the accident, that showed you how you should change what you were doing, right? Right. But sometimes he does hit us twice on the head too to get through. Does anyone else have something they'd like to share? Lois?
I was thinking about it this week, and my mind went way back. I grew up basically as an only child because my brother was 14 years older than I was, and so I only knew him as another adult in my life. And so at a very early age, I was very comfortable being alone. We lived on a farm, didn't have any nearby neighbors. So most of my time was spent entertaining myself or doing chores that my folks found appropriate for me to do. And so at the time that meant nothing to me. But looking back, I see a pattern developing. And then I went to school, and that was a brand new experience. This little girl from the country suddenly had a whole room full. I think there were 36 first graders. And we were there the first day and went to recess and came back in, and some boy had the nerve to be sitting in the desk where I had been sitting before recess. And I didn't know what to do about that. So I stood there almost in tears because he was in my seat and where was I going to sit? And I didn't know what to do about it. But I had a very understanding teacher, and she straightened things out, and I got back to my seat. I don't remember, but my parents told me many times that within the first 2 weeks of school, I came home and said, well, I know that I'm going to be a teacher when I grow up. And so there was another seed planted. And I think it was a God event that I was totally unaware of. When I was about 12, my mother was hospitalized for, almost 3 months. And I very quickly learned how to cook and learned how to keep house. And again, that would come in good standing later on, but didn't think much about it at the time. Went on to college and had a roommate that went home every weekend. And so, again, I learned to be content alone. Didn't bother me at all that she went home every weekend. I didn't mind being alone. I could find plenty of things to do, and there were other people there that were friends, and I didn't need a 7-day-a-week roommate. I became a college senior and started thinking about a job, and I applied at Adams County because I lived in Adams County. That's where I grew up, and so I applied there, and I had an interview scheduled at Littlestown. When the phone rang, and I rarely got phone calls at Millersville, because again, it was before cell phones and that was long distance and you didn't call just to say, hi, how are you doing? And so I answered the phone and it was the superintendent of Spring Grove School District, Grant Herr, and that name probably means nothing to any of you here, but he was a Mennonite man that grew up near my home, although I really didn't know him. He was much older, but I knew who he was. And he said, I believe you're a senior at Millersville. Are you looking for a job? Well, yes. He said, I would like you to interview at Spring Grove. And I said, well, I have an interview scheduled. It was just like the next day at Littlestown. He said, keep that interview, but don't accept it. Don't accept any contract. Don't make any commitment. I want our board to interview you. And so we set up an interview with Spring Grove. And of course, you all know the rest of that is history. I spent 36 years in Spring Grove. And without God's presence, many, many times when I was unaware of it, I would not have made 36 years. You know, there were times when you had to make a split moment decision, and you don't have that kind of wisdom if God isn't there with you. And sometimes children can come up with real trying situations too. And so, again, everything seemed to be falling in place. And then Walter died. And my parents were in failing health, particularly my mother. And I watched them grieve in two very different ways. My mother could not accept the fact that she had to bury a son. My dad would say, I miss him too, but I don't know why he's not here and I am, so I have to go on. And that left a major impression on me. Today, I am where I am with all of those experiences behind me that have contributed, I think, I know, to being very content living alone. And I can honestly say, I do live alone, but I am not lonely. And I think from the time I was a youngster, growing up kind of like an only child, the way was being planned and prepared by a loving Heavenly Father.
So lots of circumstances helped you so he met you in a lot of circumstances and events. Anyone else that would like to share anything? Louise?
I have 7 loaves of banana nut bread back there. They're little ones. You may take one and put a little donation in the Nickels for Neighbors bucket. So whatever you put in will be appreciated, and you may take a loaf of bread. Thank you.
And does anyone have any stories that they want to share about how he met you? Melissa has one.
I have a couple, but I'll try to shorten them. The first one is when me and my husband at the time were in a little apartment, and it was my great dream for us to get our own house. You know, get my big girl panties on, and so we spent a lot of time looking at houses and came across many that I really wanted to have. And for whatever reason, it didn't work out. One I remembered, so silly. So I always thought, you know, I would make my bathroom lavender. I don't know why. Love that color. And so we came across this house, and it had a lavender tub with a lavender toilet. Now, what are the odds, people? I mean, really. And I was like, well, this has just got to happen. I mean, I got to have this lavender tub. And so we called some family members to see if we could get the finances, and my grandfather was willing. And here, the bank came and took it. And so the bank had it, and they didn't, I'm not really sure of, you know, what all happened there, but for whatever reason, we couldn't, you know, try for it at that time. So that was a disappointment. And so our realtor one day called us and said, hey, I have like 2 houses for this Saturday that we can go look at. And we're like, okay. So we went and looked at one and weren't really feeling it. And then there was this other house that looked promising, and we were going to head there, and I think we actually got there. And the realtor went and tried to open the door, and the key wouldn't go in. And so he called, and they said, oh yeah, we forgot to tell you. The last showing they had, the key broke off inside the doorknob. Really? Like, okay. I don't know how often that happens, but so he goes, well, he goes, there's this other house that just came on the market. And, you know, I really, you know, it's just worth a shot to show it to you. And I'm like, okay. Well, at this point, I'm like, I don't really even care. I wouldn't just go home. Like, so we showed up. It was nothing like I wanted, nothing that I had expected. It was a townhouse in town, very small yard. Nothing really special about it. But we went and looked anyway. And as soon as I walked in, I just felt, and it was so outdated. I mean, it was still the paneling all over the walls, blue carpet, popcorn ceilings, and nothing. I was just like, wow, you know. But we were looking for a fixer-upper anyway, and I don't know. I just felt home. I felt it just felt right, and so husband really wasn't. You know, he would be willing to keep looking, but I was like, no, I think this is it. It's nothing like I thought, nothing at all. And often we find that God always has something different in plan for us than what we originally have. And so we put an offer in that day, and they had other showings, but we got it. And so that's where I am today. And I feel like God closed so many doors to get to where I'm at, because he knew what was ahead. And each year we took a room and redid it. And now it's mine, and it's just me and Serenity there. And it's a house that I can afford being a single person. And God knew that I was going to need that. And then another time I was very content at my job, and a friend came to me and said, "Oh, this job opened up where I'm at, and I really think you'd be good for it." And so I applied, why not? And I met with them, and the money seemed like it was more. And unfortunately, sometimes money talks. And so, but I was very distraught about it. I'm not a very good decision maker anyway. And so to make a decision which felt really big at this point, because it's, your financial being, I was just beside myself. Couldn't decide what I wanted to do. I even went to my supervisor at the time and said, "Hey, I'm just going to be open to you about this. I have to leave early because I'm going to an interview." And I could tell like she didn't really want me to go. And I just said, "Well, I got to do what's I feel is right for my family or whatever." So anyway, so I don't know. We went out to eat. A bunch of us in a family went out to eat one night. And at the end of the meal, we went out in the parking lot. And I think I was talking to my mom and maybe my sister. And I was just explaining to them, how I just didn't know what to do. Could you just make the decision for me? Because I don't know what to do. And here, lo and behold, I would never think to see him here because he was an Italian. And I don't know where we were, but it wasn't an Italian restaurant. Dr. Gata, one of the doctors that I worked for at the time, came walking out of his car to go into the restaurant. And I just found it really odd to see him at that time when I was talking about work. And so I was just surprised, and I didn't really think anything of it. And later on, me and my mom talked, and we were on our way home, and we both like called each other and we're like, "Was that a sign? Was that God saying, hey, this is like, where you're supposed to be?" So later on that week or whatever, my job offered me more money to stay with them, and I'm still there today and still content. And it's the job that I need because it is so, what's the word I want? Lenient with, I can make my own hours if I need to, and being a single, mom, you can only imagine how important that might be. So, and sorry, just some other times I never really felt God talk to me, but I always felt like an overwhelming feeling come over me, ones that I couldn't explain. And one, I think I've shared this before, but I was in the hospital with cancer, and I was just having a really hard time sleeping that night. I was worried and I was afraid. And all of a sudden, this feeling of just peace came over me, and I couldn't explain it. I believed in God, but I didn't have the relationship that I have with him today at that point. And later on, I found out that that was this very same night that this church was still having their prayer meetings on Wednesdays. And right around that same time when you guys were here and I was feeling afraid and felt the presence, you guys were praying for me. So it's just really awesome to see you work, to see him work in your life, even when we think we know what's better. So thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. So I think I heard you say feelings, circumstances, even other people, seeing another person, lots of things. So, and that he provided what you would need that you didn't know you would need. So he was a provider. I know Ed wants to share. We'll share something. Is there anyone else that wants to share before he does? Okay, so did you want, no, okay. Ed, do you want to share up here or, okay, Ed's gonna come forward and share.
I was a bit unsure of what story I should tell. Should I talk about a young boy with big reading problems? Should I talk about when Jesus met a rebellious teen? Should I talk about when Jesus met financial needs of a young couple? Should I talk about how Jesus was there in a caving accident? Should I talk about how Jesus met work goals? How about sunrise or Bible stories or songs or word of a friend or a plant closing? I think I'm led to talk about work goals. I know that doesn't sound very spiritual, but it was a dramatic time in my life that I sensed God speaking and working in my life. I drove a lot of miles at this point in my job. I was sales for Moyer Packing, and I think I was on the turnpike. I don't remember for sure, but I was praying. My pattern was I didn't have a radio or anything on in the morning. I would just think and pray as I traveled to my first appointment. And wasn't an audible voice, but it seemed like God was saying, why don't you pray your goals to me? I had a goal. You know, we were encouraged in the business to have a goal. And my stretch goal was 100,000 pounds, which is 2.5 trailer loads of meat per week. And to average that for the month was my goal. I had done it already, but it was a bit of a rare occurrence. And so I said, okay, I can do that. So I started praying that. And then I think that was in March. And then in the next month, April, I averaged 100,000 pounds per week for the month. And I was thanking God, and I was, at that time, the meat business was sluggish, and our own plant pounds were down, and I was ecstatic. And I would continue to pray as I drove along, and then when I got to work, I would go to the plant once a month or once a week, and I would get my figures for the prior week. The next month, it was another 100,000 pounds, and I felt led to say out loud, "Oh, thank God, another 100,000 pounds for this week." And that was in April, and then in about 6 months, I was again thanking God as I traveled along because I knew it was beyond what I was doing. And he said, this isn't a quote, I can't remember the exact words, but it seemed like he was saying, you silly, it's not about your work and it's not about you doing better. It's about showing myself strong. And I said, yeah. And so what does that mean? He said, I want you to tell your boss how this whole thing has progressed. Now, my boss he was a great guy. We had a good relationship, but in previous conversations, we had talked about, I had skirted the issue of faith and things, and he thinks that faith and religion is a good thing, but To each his own. That's a quote from him. In other words, don't muddy the waters with your faith in my life. And so I agreed I would do that, but I told a couple people to pray for me I usually went up there Tuesday, right? So a couple people were praying for me, but it just seemed like every opportunity I had to talk to him about it. Of course, I had over 100,000 pounds that week, the prior week. This has been like 6 months that this is happening. And it just seemed like there was no time that we could get alone to talk about it. Finally, he went to check something out in the cooler, and I followed him, and I told him about, how I had prayed and God was answering my prayer and things. And then my boss, who's not an emotional guy, said, "Ed, I love you like a brother, but you remember what I told you about religion, to each his own." And I was almost a little hurt by that, but I did what I thought God called me to do. And then, the years went by, and after the year was up, I didn't average, that was the 12th month was the last that I averaged 100,000 pounds. The third, there was enough residual that over 100,000 pounds that the 13th month actually was I averaged over 100,000 pounds just because of how much over the other months were. And shows me how powerful God is, but it's not really about the work. It's not really about the things, the material things. He wanted somehow to speak to my boss and to speak to me about how powerful he is, and he's got things under control. But then I retired, and my boss and I would talk periodically, and finally a few years ago he passed away. And I went to his wake, and just some things that were said there led me to believe that he had made peace with God sometime in that period.
Thanks, Ed. So, a not audible voice of God you thought you heard. And I also heard you say that we don't know why he speaks to us sometimes. It's really him doing the work. He's meeting us, he's drawing us, he's coming to us, but it's for his purpose, not for ours. It may lead to something we need, but it's in his greater plan. So as we go through the rest of the service and we leave today, then just continue to think about that. He wants to meet us all the time. Often it's times when we aren't even planning to meet him, and sometimes we're walking away from him. So as we go into this next song, just continue to think about that through the rest of this service.
I'm going to do the same thing I did with the other song, and I want to go through the words just a little bit in this next one, because I think, let me borrow the clicker. Actually, the first song I want to go back to, because after hearing your stories and thinking of my own that I didn't share, I'm trying to find the words here. Your response to what God has done in your life, or your response to seeing him at work in your life, should be what these words say. I will follow. I will listen. I will love you all of my days, because he's carrying you through each and every day. I will sing to and worship the King who is worthy. He's the only one worthy of your praise, and it's because of who he is. And we get the blessing of seeing him in our lives and seeing him as comforter, as the Prince of Peace, as all of these different things. But who he is who we're worshiping. You know, he is the Alpha, Omega, and all of those other names. And will you bow down before him and love and adore him? So we're going to sing this next song, I Extol You. And so worship him as we sing this in light of your stories. And think again of who he is. Prince of Peace, your counselor. He's merciful. He's the Son of God. Lord of hosts. He's a conqueror, the coming King and ever-living God. And those are just a few reasons to extol him. Please stand.
Son of God, Lord of hosts, conqueror, coming King and ever-living God, I extol you, I extol you. You are high above the earth, all creation shouts your word. I extol you, Lord, I extol you. I extol you. Prince of Peace, Counselor, merciful, Son of God, Lord of hosts, conqueror, coming King and ever-living God, I extol you, Lord, I extol you. You are high above the earth, all creation shouts your word, I extol